You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner with the Wedding Biz, in which I conduct in-depth and revealing interviews of icons and who I feel are the next generation icons of the weddings and event industry. And this is all to provide you with education and inspiration. And now today's guest is Morgan Childs, who first began with Moana events and Belle Destination events, and then added another element by creating Modern Elopement, for which she is the CEO and creative director. Morgan has been called the elopement expert by Destination I Do magazine. She is a planner who started an elopement brand back in 2015 when she saw a trend for smaller weddings happening. And of course, the concept has exploded since COVID. She's been named the top wedding planner in Hawaii by Modern Luxury magazine. And if you want to get help making it through this pandemic and beyond, this is a must listen. So enjoy my conversation with Morgan Childs. Morgan, it is really fun for me to talk to you knowing you're in Hawaii because I have a special love, especially for Maui. I love it. So, hey, welcome.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting because at first I thought you grew up in Honolulu, which of course is such a bigger, more cosmopolitan in a sense island. But Kauai, I mean, there's not a big population there. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was probably the most idyllic childhood you could imagine on this small island where most everybody knew each other. And we were barefoot and on the beach every day and had tons of friends, super safe, always outside. But it was interesting. I remember applying for colleges, and one of the colleges I was looking at was U of M, and they had 40,000 at that time.
Yeah.
And that was the size of my island. And I couldn't imagine that. I just couldn't imagine it. So it definitely shaped who I was.
What are some of the main ways that you feel it did?
I think that I have this appreciation for just culture and for events in a different way, because it is really a part of our culture to get together. And when you grow up and everyone's always celebrating, I think that was probably a special piece. And it just gives you this sense of how spectacular the world is, I guess, when you grow up on this island that is by National Geographic voted the most beautiful place on earth at one point. So,
wow.
You know, it's just special. And I had to leave to understand how special it was, but it really is special.
Well, and from what I understand, you went to the complete opposite, which was New York City eventually.
I did. So I went to school in Boston and pretty much as far away as I could get.
Yeah.
And then I lived in New York right after college. So total culture shock. And I loved every minute of it. We have this thing that we call island fever. So
yes, I've heard of that.
Born and raised there, I was ready to get out and I wanted the opposite. So went to a city.
Well, and I know that you were producing high profile events. How did you get into that side of the business?
Yeah, it was actually just so fortuitous and maybe something that you would appreciate. So I started training professionally as a singer when I was 11 and pursued that professionally and went to Boston Conservatory of Music.
Great school.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great school. And went to New York City to pursue theater and music and quickly realized that that was not what I wanted to do. And so I'm in New York City and I have absolutely no idea of what I want to do in my career now. I spent a decade on something. And one of my friends had a band, of course. I had all these musician friends, and he asked me to manage his band. Okay. So I said, why not? 22. And taught myself sort of the music industry at that point and managed his band in New York and got hired to manage another band. And I was planning their CD release parties and had so much fun planning these epic, fun, creative parties that I started to get hired just to plan parties. And I had this epiphany that that was a job. I had no idea that was a job. And that's how I landed into events. I decided to pursue it seriously after my career in music. And then I eventually ended up working for one of the top principal firms in the city, producing just these huge multi-million-dollar galas with, celebrity attendees. And we did the Angel Ball. We had this like amazing entertainment, like Stevie Wonder. And,
Oh, wow.
you had all these top, socialites there. And it was just the best way to get my feet wet in this industry.
But then you ended up going back to Hawaii, moving to Honolulu. And I know that your company there is Moana Bell Events.
Yeah, we did low budget weddings here and there and doing day of planning and, just being scrappy and pulling it together. And we got published in a few magazines and then a few more really large publications. And then we just started to get known for our weddings and events and have just sort of blossomed from there and had the honor of doing some really fun celeb weddings and just some really beautiful weddings here.
So I read that, I'm not sure if it was on your site or in an article, but I read that you noticed back in 2015 a trend for smaller weddings starting to take shape. Why do you think that is? Why did that trend start?
Yeah. So really organically in my company, I started getting a lot of calls around 2015 for couples who were wanting small weddings. So 30 guests or under. And they, wanted to do the weddings that we were doing. And so they would call and I hated it because I wasn't really able to serve them. Our planning fee was so high and what we were producing on this big scale just didn't make sense, budget wise for a small group of people. And I just couldn't really serve them with the business model that I had. And that really bothered me because who doesn't want to do small weddings? And also, those were the weddings that I would want as a planner. I would want to go to this, destination and have this intimate wedding with 25 of my closest family and friends. And so I kept hearing from couples that, they wanted to do this. And what I realized was that this was something that was a needed service. The reasons that I was hearing from our couples were that, in planning a smaller wedding, I think your expectations are different of what you're going to do, not only in the format of the wedding, but also in what you're going to spend. I mean, you have those few couples who are going to do this huge elaborate affair for the same amount of money that they would do a huge affair.
Uh-huh.
But the majority of people, even if they have that money, don't necessarily want to spend it because your perception changes. Just generationally, I think the whole wedding experience is shifting. And a lot of the couples just didn't want this huge wedding that their parents had. They didn't want to invite all the cousins and aunts and uncles that they didn't know.
Yeah.
They just wanted a smaller affair. They were focused on experience rather than the whole, production wedding program part of it. And so we were seeing that as well. And then we were seeing people who were planning huge weddings and then got so stressed out that they decided they wanted to elope. People have great jobs and they're professionals and have a lot to do during the day. And, the thought of planning 100, 200, 300 person event on top of that isn't fun for a lot of people. So the thought of doing something simple and easy and smaller was really attractive. So for a lot of reasons, we were seeing that becoming more and more a trend.
The first thing that I think about when I think about smaller weddings is that it's intimate, not just in size, but it's an opportunity to really connect with everybody there. If it's 25, 30, 40, maybe 50. And that's what I think of first, being able to really have, like you say, when an experience. I mean, with these large weddings, you just can't get to everybody, right? There's maybe a handful of people you truly connect with, and then there's another level that's a little less. And so I love that aspect. One thing I would really like to get in soon is the terms. Matter of fact, I learned, Morgan, from looking through your site, So there's micro weddings, mini weddings, tiny weddings, pop-up weddings, mini monies, sequel weddings, and elopement weddings. It would be great, Morgan, if you could explain the difference between some of these terms and which should we really be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's important for people in the wedding industry to know that there are a lot of new terms coming out and that couples are really excited about some of the new things they're able to do. Not only because they may not be able to do their original format wedding, and then this gives them something to be excited about, but also because they just want a different experience. And I really think this is the future of our industry, that couples are going to want to decide the wedding experience they have. They're going to lean towards the non-traditional because it doesn't always fit what their ideal wedding experience would be.
Yeah.
So those terms, I think micro wedding is probably the most popular right now.
That's the one I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So micro wedding isn't so much a different wedding experience. I think that is just a term that planners started using to be 50 guests or under. And so it really doesn't have anything different in terms of format, although I'm sure some people are categorizing that as what we call an elopement wedding, which I'll get to.
Okay, got it.
So then the mini wedding actually doesn't really refer to anything either. A mini wedding is one of those terms that's, kind of a really small wedding and less than 40 guests, maybe abbreviated. But again, I think maybe more of an umbrella term.
Okay.
The tiny wedding refers to a really packaged experience. So tiny weddings are 10 guests or under, and often at a specific venue with a ceremony and then maybe a cocktail hour only. A pop-up wedding is similar to that in that it's actually a shared wedding day experience where one couple will come in and use those photographer and officiant and decor and have a little, maybe a champagne toast afterwards. And then later in the day, another couple will come into that setup and so on. So there's a couple different, wedding couples coming in that day and sharing this experience, which of course is just probably a really good way to cut those costs down.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And then the mini moni is a term for a really small ceremony now with the intent to have a larger wedding later. And that's a lot of what we're seeing in COVID is, having this tiny ceremony, even if it's in your backyard and it just might be the two of you, knowing that you're going to do something later on. So usually for legal reasons.
Yeah.
And the sequel wedding has actually been around pre-pandemic. Sequel wedding is any couple that's having two weddings. So you could be having a wedding now that's a bit smaller with the intent of having one later, or you could have, say, a different cultural wedding. Maybe you're doing a Hindu wedding and then you want to have a Western ceremony, or you're doing one on one side of the country and one on the other. So it could mean any reason why a couple would have just two weddings.
Got it.
And the elopement wedding is what we do. And that is what I would define as 30 guests or under. And it is a non-traditional wedding format. So it really encompasses everything from just a couple going to a mountaintop with a photographer and getting married, all the way to having a chateau in France and having an intimate, beautiful dinner with 25 of your closest friends. So it's a wedding that is a small wedding experience with a non-traditional format. And usually what that means is you're not going to have that wedding program. You're not going to have the, speeches, and you're not going to have those formal dances and dancing all night and after party. Instead, maybe that's, some of what you were talking about with the experience. The focus is more so on the ceremony. And then it's afterwards, usually an intimate dinner that's more about great food and wine and conversation instead of necessarily running through that whole reception program.
I want to be sure you know about another great show on the Wedding Biz Network, The Business of Being Creative, with host Sean Lowe. You've often heard Sean on my Next Level episodes. Well, now he's taking the creative business advice he's shared with accomplished notables such as Preston Bailey, Vincente Wolf, Nate Berkus, Style Me Pretty, and Sylvia Weinstock, and more, and offering it to you on his new show. There are already a few episodes for you to catch up on where he discusses the power of being niched, pricing strategies, metrics of success, and so much more. So in short, you're going to gain a ton of value and action items from Sean's show, and you'll have the opportunity to talk back by recording messages of feedback from right there in the show notes. So if you are a creative who is turning your craft into a business or want to take it further, head to theweddingbiznetwork.com and take a listen to The Business of Being Creative by Sean Lowe. Again, that's theweddingbiznetwork.com. I'm also curious about how, as a planner, you price these, relative to the regular full-blown ones. Because, I'm just imagining that although there's a certain amount of less work, there's a lot less people at these weddings, still you've got to plan a ceremony. You've got to get, with the floral designer and the catering and the venue, and you got to negotiate the contracts. You still have a lot going on. How do you price these out?
I think that it depends on what you are doing for your couple, and that what planners will need to keep in mind is that couples don't necessarily want the same planning experience if they are doing a smaller wedding. Mm-hmm. And that's what I found in my company. So we actually, in 2015, when I realized all of this, I started a sister brand in my company called Modern Elopement. And what we did was I dissected what the traditional experience was and what I did as a planner, which was everything, right? Everything that you said was totally custom. We just built it from the ground up.
Yeah.
And, we're probably spending about 250 hours plus per client within a year's time planning their event.
Okay.
And so it didn't make sense, as I mentioned, with our high fees for these smaller weddings who the couples were articulating, they just wanted something simpler. And so I think with planners, you have to keep in mind that even though, they may say that they want the same thing from you, they don't really need the same thing from you. And ultimately, you can't produce the same thing for a less amount of money, right? You can't spend 200 hours with a couple and get paid less because they have less guests.
Yeah.
So I think that what we did is that we simplified the experience for them. And we just had a specific, process of planning that was abbreviated. And by branding it differently from our main company, the couples could understand what it was they were getting. They weren't expecting the level of full design and planning that we usually were doing for our weddings. They knew they were getting an abbreviated, simplified experience, and they were happy with the lower price point. So I think that that's what planners have to keep in mind is it has to be different, and the expectations towards the client need to be different, but also internally, it really has to be a different process that you're doing.
What about, one thing I think might come up too is some people being concerned about blocking out dates on their calendar, to take some of these smaller weddings when they otherwise might get a regular size one. What can you say about that?
Yeah, I think that that's a huge concern. And when I see a lot of planners doing micro weddings, I think, gosh, you're doing a smaller wedding and it's taking the same amount of time for you internally and that great valuable spot on your calendar. And it might not necessarily be making the same return on investment for you. And what we were able to do in our elopement brand was we simplified the back end process so much that we were planning our elopement weddings in about 8 to 15 hours as opposed to 250, which meant that we were able to take on a lot of those on top of our regular calendar. It didn't take away from the clients that we were providing the full service to.
Yeah.
So I really think that's the thing that planners have to keep in mind is it's not going to be equal. And right now we're in this gray area of, clients postponing or having to change the format of their weddings. But coming from a place of having been doing it since 2015 successfully, I just want to say to planners that you can't do that the same way because you're going to max out your calendar and ultimately your clients, are not going to be able to pay your full rates.
Do you think that this trend for smaller weddings is going to continue post-COVID?
Absolutely. I have no doubt. The average cost of a wedding last year in the US was $38,000.
Okay.
And that's average, right? So we have couples that are spending, of course, way in excess of that. But I think that now that the elopements have really gone, mainstream and popular and everybody knows sort of what this small wedding experience is, couples are going to start really understanding that that's an option for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of couples were already understanding that, hey, I can either have a huge group of people and spend not as much money on them, or a smaller group of people have this experience that I really wanted and be able to treat them really well and get all those things that I saw on Pinterest or do all those really cool experiences. So I think that the two big things are happening is weddings will never get less expensive.
Right.
And so it will always be something that couples are looking, for a better option, at least a huge portion of them.
Uh-huh.
And they're also valuing different things, Andy. We have a lot of couples who are articulating, we want to put a down payment on a house.
Mm-hmm.
That means more to us than spending $70,000 on a wedding. And again, they may have it, but it's just, they're getting a little bit more savvy about how to spend it and how to make that money go a bit further. So I don't see this going anywhere.
Yeah. Also, even just today, I was reading an article about how people are, obviously being forced because of COVID to shave expenses. But also what's happening too is that people are more interested in saving than ever before because of this, because now we've learned what can happen and to be ready for the future. And I think it's something that we have to accept in the industry, in the wedding industry and the event industry, is that it's like during a recession, when we all go through this experience of people cutting their budgets and wanting to stay down. And I do think I agree with you. I think this is going to continue. And the only way we can get through this is to embrace it, that's why I want to have you on. We need to embrace this new concept. It's the only way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's so much, and from what I've seen, there's just so much beauty in creating an experience that is intimate for your couples that makes sense for you to plan and makes sense for them financially. I say that our elopement couples are usually our happiest couples, and we do, huge six-figure events, multi-six-figure events. And there's still that stress of that investment that couple is making. And the fact that they're hosting 150 plus people and all of the things that go along with the year of planning that event, that these elopement couples who just made a couple choices had, this wedding experience they knew that they were getting, showed up, and it was better than they were expecting. They were just so happy and stress-free. And to just know there's another way as the wedding industry to create beautiful wedding experiences that don't have to be what we're used to doing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take away from anything. And I agree with what you said. I think we have to be smart about it. And I think we need to give our couples more options and say, I get it. You might want to save money. You might not want to do something big for whatever health concerns you might have as well, that I'm sure will extend for a little bit. Or, you may have another thing that you want to spend that money on. And so here's a different option for you to still have a beautiful experience that we know you're going to love. Because it isn't about creating a less than wedding.
Right.
It's just about a different format.
Yeah, I get that. Can you tell me about your wedding planning membership blog, Modern Love, and also about the Elopement Wedding Pro community?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started a membership just a few months ago, actually, for DIY brides who were planning small weddings, because a lot of couples don't know that or don't think that they should have planners with their, elopement weddings. So
Right.
it's like a wedding subscription where every month, they have podcasts and videos and planning things. And we just help them plan their entire wedding. So it's perfectly suited for, small weddings. So again, 30 or less. It's certainly not for everybody who's planning a huge wedding. But yeah, we've never really seen anything like this. I'm a little bit excited to introduce something different in the market and to really see how brides embrace that.
Yeah.
And then we started an Elopement Pro community. So I've just been, as I said, having had the experience previously and knowing how popular it is, we were scheduled to plan over 50 elopements this year in my company, along with a full schedule of, full planning weddings.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, this is something that's been taking off. And this was pre-COVID. People were really resonating with this. So I just wanted to give back to everybody, photographers and officiants and planners who are all of a sudden thrown into this small wedding world and don't really know what to do with it. So I have a free community that has our elopement trend report that we send out every week. And if you search on Facebook, it's just Elopement Wedding Pro, and you'll see that community and come join us in there. And then I'm also doing a free masterclass for planners on how to add elopements successfully to your wedding business. For all those reasons we talked about, how it doesn't quite work the same way.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that masterclass for them. So if they go to modernelopement.com/masterclass, they can sign up for free, totally free.
When is that?
It is in about the third week of November.
Okay. And again, that's free. People just can go and sign up.
Yes. So free masterclass.
Wow. Very generous, Morgan. That's really.
Yeah. I understand where this is. And I feel like having been here and figured out all these problems before, that I should probably help other planners do that. And certainly 17 years into my career, I think that it really excites me to be able to help out and do something different and new and exciting for me.
Well, great. Well, before we go, is there anything else maybe I didn't cover that you feel is important related to this topic that you'd like to share?
I think that the only other thing I would say is, a few years ago, I realized as a wedding planner that I wasn't really thinking about my future of my business.
Mm-hmm.
I was just getting the next event and the next event and the next event. And I think that's what happens in the event industry as a whole, because we love our clients and we always want to do the best job for the next event that we have. And then this happening has really had a lot of people step back and think, wow, what is it that I want out of my company? Do I want to diversify it? Do I want to sell it one day? Do I want more free time? Because I'm really enjoying the free time that I have. And so I just want to encourage really creative entrepreneurs in the wedding industry to think about what's that next step, because I was so thankful to have had this other company during this time and to have, so many things that we could do and a bit of a diversified, offering already in place, that it does take a few years to really put something successful together. And I think that we don't really talk about that as a wedding industry, like, what's your exit strategy? Or,
right. Seriously.
Like how do you retire?
Right.
I mean, we don't, right?
That's right.
No one's ever talked to me about those things. So I just have a passion for that, because a few years ago, I just realized, I was burnt out and really wanted something creative to do. And having this whole elopement company was such a life-changing experience for me, that I think this is a great time for other industry professionals to just embrace something new, to look around them, decide what they want to do, and start doing that, because ultimately we're all going to want to step back or step out at some point. So it's just good to think about.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, I appreciate that. And really, thank you, Morgan, for coming on the show to help clarify this very apropos topic that is on all of our minds that we're all dealing with. And like I said earlier, that I believe we need to embrace. This is not going to go away. This is going to continue, even after COVID. So
it is. And I think it's not a bad thing. I think that it just sped up what was already going to happen a bit in the wedding industry.
I totally agree. Totally.
Yeah.
I think there's so many things that sped up by many years because of this in a lot of respects. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's not a bad thing. We have to embrace it. It is very difficult for our industry. And I did want to, just thank you, because I love hearing people like Nancy come on and just everything you're doing to make sure that you're keeping everybody updated. But it's important. And sometimes it's a hard hit industry right now. So
yeah, it is. Well, thanks for saying that. Well, thank you, Morgan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I really enjoyed this.
Great. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Morgan Childs. And just a quick side note, Morgan offered a free masterclass in elopement weddings, and there's one more left taking place on November 30th. Be sure to check out her websites, modernelopement.com and moanabell.com. Also, her social media handles are at Moana Bell Events and at Modern Elopement. All of this and the spelling can be found in our show notes at theweddingbiz.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your colleagues. This is one that everyone should be aware of. And don't forget to listen to our follow-on segment that comes out every Wednesday called The Next Level, in which I have a guest co-host, and together we tease out some of the highlights of the interview, help break them down, and talk about them in a way that you can apply to build your own business even further. And this week's guest co-host is going to be Jennifer Stein, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Destination I Do magazine. And next week, we've got filmmaker extraordinaire Caleb Jordan Lee. Really wonderful, wonderful interview. Be sure to follow us at The Wedding Biz, and would love it if you could subscribe so that you're aware whenever new episodes come out. And we'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.